welcome to our last panel of the conference. We're going to be talking about the future and how the airline industry can thrive moving forward after some tough years, and especially with a lot of change coming up. My name is Joanna Pluchinska. I'm the European aviation and travel correspondent for Reuters. I'll be moderating today, but I think we're more interested to hear what you all have to say. So maybe we could just start, if you could each introduce yourselves and maybe give us a short sense of what you'd like to chat about today, how you see the future of the industry.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Ashley McDougall. I'm the general manager for Shell's aviation business in Europe and Africa. My team looks after the sales of fuels to our customers and also of decarbonization solutions. So we are a part of the sectors in decarbonization business unit in Shell, and we've committed to be a net zero company by 2050. We've also committed to 10% of the fuel that we supply to the aviation sector as being SAF by 2030, so I hope to be able to bring in that sustainability perspective to today's discussion and the producer perspective as well. Yeah.
So my name is Roland Baan. I'm the CEO of Topso. Topso is an 80-year-old company, a technology company, that is completely focused now on delivering technologies for decarbonization in the broadest sense. In this panel specifically, one of the things that we do is we are active in all types of SAF, from bio to power to liquids. We, for instance, we have about 140,000 barrels a day in the US of biofuels that we produce, which is probably the largest at the moment in the world. And we have just announced that with Cecil, we will start a joint venture that will be the only end-to-end pure-play SAF player in the world, for the moment, to build, own, and produce SAFs.
You forgot to say the most important thing, which is that you are, or at least you used to be, a frequent flyer with Finnair.
I still have my top tier. We should talk about that.
That's good. That's good. So my name is Topi Manner. I'm CEO of Finnair, and Finnair, you might know that we run a network model, a commercial hub up in the north, a couple of 100 kilometers from the border of Russia. So we are hit by the double crisis, first the pandemic, and now the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent closure of Russian airspace. And we have needed to revamp our network quite a bit. And from where we are, up north, there's not that much to fly to towards north. Besides the Finnish Lapland, which is a fantastic place for you to go. I recommend that warmly. So we have been pivoting our network to west. We have been, flying more to Middle East, and going around the Russian airspace, we have kept our foothold in Russia. But this has required tremendous transformation from us, tremendous adaptation from us, going through the double crisis. And coming back to the theme of this panel, future-proofing airlines, I don't know what the future is, but I sure know that it requires a lot of adaptation. And I think that we have a story to tell on that one.
My name is Juan Montero. I'm the director of the Florence School of Regulation, the European University Institute. So as an academic, we do the usual research, training, but in Florence, we do something which is also quite unique. We hold these policy events. So we host stakeholders, authorities. Many of you have been with us, lots of familiar faces. So we help to advance the regulatory debate. We are, I think, privileged witness in this evolution of the debate, so maybe that's something that we can share in this forum. And also I think that something that we witness is not just future-proof. I mean, it's creating the future. I mean, this is a living industry. It's not just about adapting, it's about creating the future, and that's something that we witness in Florence on a day-to-day basis. And again, this is an industry that is living, it's creating the future. And what we do, it's, what we see, we would witness, it's about sustainability, it's about digitalization, and how this industry is leading in both fronts.
Great.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Philip Cornelis. I'm the Director for Aviation in the European Commission. And I work with my modest department on all the topics that the CEOs were saying we're not working on, and many more. So yes, our focus at the moment, of course, is very similar to the one that is existing in the sector as a whole. It's about the greening of aviation and how we can support that with the instruments that we have available at EU level. But it's also still about ensuring that the internal market in Europe, of which we are very proud and has brought all the benefits that were rightly mentioned in the previous panel. We're also there to try to maintain the vibrancy and the competitive nature of that internal market is also an important focus. And I look forward to debate with a very interesting group, including a professor who's helping us to design policies, and most amazingly, to be on the same panel with energy people. That was not the case a few years ago. I think that's really interesting development, that the energy sector is now part of the aviation ecosystem in a way that was taken for granted in the past.
Fantastic.
And I'm not yet a frequent flyer, but hope to be.
Sure, you're welcome. But the energy sector these days is part of everything, so.
Yeah.
So I was thinking we could maybe start with some questions from our polls, basically from people who are watching from far away. So this is also to the audience that's here. Which policies should be prioritized to ensure the competitive decarbonization of Europe's aviation industry? We've heard a lot of our panelists talk about it. I'm sure we're very interested to hear all of your opinions, but maybe we could start with what you all think, if you want to put in your vote. There are a couple of options here. And I guess as we wait, I think it's really wonderful that we have some energy voices here. We've heard a lot from the CEOs today about how more SAF needs to be produced, and there's not enough. So what's your response to that? We can start with you, Ashley, and then we can see the other questions and responses to this come in.
Yeah, so I would agree, first of all, that we need to accelerate SAF production, and we're taking action in Shell to do that. I mean, just about 2 weeks ago, I was in Rotterdam at our chemicals and energy plant that we have there. We're building an 820,000 ton annual production biofuels facility. It will be one of the largest in Europe. We're starting co-processing this week in Germany. So, you know, we're making a number of investments in various technologies across Europe and globally to accelerate the deployment and the availability of SAF, as well as building up supply chain. So there's a lot that's happening, and we are making progress. But that said, you know, we need to accelerate that, and there are very real challenges that you heard this morning from many of our customers and the industry in terms of some of those barriers. You know, whether that's affordability, whether that is the global competitiveness of Europe, and there are a number of others. But I certainly am keen to see it ramp up, and we're planning to play our part in that.
Great. I'm just seeing some of the answers. It looks like around half of the respondents think that the priority should be to develop a European indigenous SAF production. So I guess we could hear what you have to say about that. Is that doable?
No, it's interesting because, of course, doable is almost everything, right? If it's practical in this world, it's different. And I think the elephant in the room is the IRA. There is absolutely no doubt that a year ago Europe was far ahead when it came to synthetic fuels, green fuels technologies, etc., compared to the rest of the world. The IRA has changed that in one go. $366 billion in incentives, plus the leverage, because that represents about 30%, so another $1.5 trillion in investment money that is being attracted during this decade, basically. And the issue is that because SAF is a nascent industry, is a nascent product, whether it's bio or power to liquids. It is limited in resources. It's limited in feedstocks, it's limited in raw materials, it's limited in knowledge, it's limited in money. Now, with the sucking sound of all the money flowing to the US, with it goes all the other limited resources, which means that basically the development of the SAF production in Europe has been put back by, I would say, about a decade. It will happen, like you are building, but if I look at our own plants, and if I look at some of our customers with whom we were actually planning to build stuff here in Europe, that is all at the moment delayed, and the focus is let's do it in the US. Let's get that in so that we have the incentives, and then we'll see what the next step is going to be. And then the last point is that the US itself, with the IRA, sees itself as, in the future, the world's supplier of hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives like SAFs. So, and then I haven't even talked about the absolute lack of green power if you talk power to liquids. So it's a very big discussion, and I'm not sure that the Commission really understands what the moving parts are here. Sorry to say, Philip.
Maybe we can give the Commission a chance to give.
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to see that that this particular point is getting most attention from the audience. And there are many elements in that development of European indigenous SAF production. First of all, development of SAF production, that's already our common goal. And generally speaking, I think it's very good that partners around the world, including our friends across the Atlantic, are pursuing similar objectives of greening aviation and kickstarting the production of SAF outside California, where it was mostly confined up to now. So the point is we need to do the same in Europe. You know that we have our own views on the IRA and on the wisdom of competing between America and Europe on subsidies.
Yeah.
On subsidies when we are competing with other parts of the world and are very much in the same boat when it comes to competing with those other parts of the world. But that's an issue that goes far beyond the aviation sector and on which a general response is being put forward. I think on SAF, we do have a very strong policy in place in Europe that is a combination of regulation and incentives. Very often it's presented as if the Americans have only incentives and we only have regulation. It's not correct. We are putting in place mandates that are going to give a long-term security to energy companies to invest. I mean, giving a few years tax credit is nice, but it doesn't tell you what the long-term environment is. We try to create a long-term environment, also for the more advanced SAF, such as e-fuels. We think that is very important, and this should become law this year if all goes well. But we also have incentives, because the use of SAF will be exempted from ETS, will be eligible for additional support, which you can call a subsidy in the form of SAF allowances, which are free ETS allowances, and as we all know, ETS allowances is cash. And we've worked out that over the next 10 years, this already amounts to about 7 billion euros. So it's not negligible. And on top of that, our member states can put in place additional support schemes if they want. We have also raised the thresholds for support and aid at national level. So I think we are using both stick and carrot and incentives and regulation, and hopefully this will really kick off that production. And we need as much production as is possible. I mean.
I would actually push back on you a bit in this one, because the perception is reality in many things. And if we look at the regulation on the EU level, at least the perception, or my personal perception, the perception of the industry, perception of potentially many other industries, is that Europe is quite heavy on regulation, relatively light on incentives, especially when you compare with the US. And to Roland's point, I think that IRA is a game changer in many ways on global level on this one. And I think that Europe really would need to think through that how Europe could incentivize further. For example, in the form of tax credits, the usage of SAF, and then definitely, as also this questionnaire points out, the production of SAF. But when we would be talking about production of SAF and incentivizing the production, then at least my take would be that the subsidies potentially should be very selected so that we could avoid an unhealthy competition in terms of state aid between Europe and US and then potentially other regions of the world.
And maybe if I may add one point as well. You have to wonder who started the race on subsidy, right? We had IPSAI, Innovation Fund, Repower EU, etc. There was an equivalent 350 million euros available before IRA actually existed. The only thing is that the Americans used the same amount of money to build a far better mousetrap, to actually look at what is the objective, which is to get carbon out of the air. So they look at the CI score and connected that. It's far simpler. Getting anything out of IPSAI or the Innovation Fund takes years. It's uncertain. You are, as an applicant, you're paralyzed because if you invest in the meantime, it is being deducted from your right to have any incentive. So it is just a poor building, and it is being outperformed by the same amount of money, but in an excellent building. And I think the best thing you can do is learn from it.
So keeping that in mind, we're seeing so many airlines saying they're going to have 10% of their jet fuel be SAF by 2030. Is that realistic? Is that actually going to happen? Open question to anyone who wants to.
Well, we hope so, and we're certainly trying. So, we have the same target. I know a number of our customers, IATA has the same target, and we were very pleased to see that adopted. What I would say is whether it's going to be 10% in Europe is a question or not, right? To your point, because the mandates are very helpful and definitely send a very strong signal and give longer term certainty. So there's no doubt about that. But if we compare the level of mandate that's being discussed, whether it's 5 or 6% versus the aspiration the industry has of 10%, if I look at my customers and the conversations we're having, obviously the mandates, we're gearing up and we're ready to supply, and I'd love to be able to supply more on a voluntary basis. But with that additional 4 or 5%, those customers who start their journey in one country and 5 countries later finish their day, they have a choice about where they pick that up. And right now, the stackable incentives that are available in the US, combined with the logistics advantages of having that relatively concentrated in the selective supply chain, and more, I would say, perhaps flexibility around feedstock or a lower cost in some cases. All of those things add up and will influence the decisions that customers make and the ultimate size of the industry in Europe beyond the mandates. And I think that's the debate, or that's the challenge or the opportunity rather that Europe has to say, okay, how much of that voluntary space and how much of that leadership do we want to take, recognizing that quite a lot has changed in the last few months. I agree with you that the IRA has changed things significantly.
And if we do who needs to front the burden of that? Should it be the producers? I mean, many argue that the energy sector is doing very well right now, that they should be able to pay for kind of the expansion of this and take the leadership role.
So share my views. I don't want to dominate here, but let's just put it into context, right? So if you look at the investment that's needed between now and 2050 to achieve the industry's goals of net zero, we're talking about $1.45 trillion. Yeah, that's billions every single year. And those are ATAG figures. And that is not something that any one party can do alone, whether it's an airline, whether it's an energy company. It's really something that needs a sectorial approach. It needs a systemic approach to make sure that there's enough green energy, there's enough, the whole system works. If you end up with supply but no demand, it's very hard to convince investors that you should be building out capacity unless there's clarity on the fact that when you invest this billions, there's going to be a customer for it at the end of the day. So I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Yes, there's an investment needed, and it will cost more, and it's an investment that will be needed across the industry, and ultimately, the end consumer needs to contribute to that as well. But it's not something one party can address alone.
So turning to the airline on the panel, is this something you can afford to invest in right now, Finnair specifically, given the other challenges that are going on? Is it fair to ask aviation to kind of also take a role in this?
I mean, to be very forthcoming about the short-term challenges, the answer would be no. I mean, we have empty pockets, basically, as an industry also on the back of the pandemic. So this is a little bit of a kangaroo strategy from the aviation perspective. Big leaps with empty pockets. So that is something that really is needed. So I think that from my perspective, Asley has a point that everybody needs to contribute. Aviation sector, airlines need to contribute. Consumers have their role in it. Definitely the regulators. But energy industry has, quite unprecedented resources for the time being, and we are talking about energy transition. So with that, the industry has an inherent responsibility, of course, in that one, and they also have the ultimate opportunity in making business with the new fuels. So therefore, I would also like to see them being proactive in this space. But then the regulators basically should be sort of greasing the development with the right kind of regulation, providing level playing field, global competitiveness for Europe, and then, as stated, providing the right incentives for usage as well as for investments.
I think it's a systemic problem. It's not any one individual entity solving the problem. You need to move forward as an ecosystem. And I think it's a mix of a basket of measures at the end of the day. I mean, you have to ensure supply. That's an obligation on the airlines, but that gives some reassurance for the producers. And then I think you have to leave room for the market to work. I mean, so you ensure supply, demand, suppliers have to start working, and let's see how it evolves. So we have to learn also about what is the passengers. I mean, we have heard about willingness just to pay like that to contribute a little bit more, but let's go more into the real world. Let's see how passengers react when prices maybe start raising. I mean, we all will learn as things evolve. It's just that we need the ball to start rolling.
So from your perspective, as someone who, you are not going to be putting any money into this, you're kind of observing. Is there anything that people are missing, any ideas in this debate that need to kind of be brought in to help solve this? Because it seems like there's a lot of finger pointing, but what's the kind of,
I think it's coming back, it's this systemic approach. It's an ecosystem, so no one is ready to take the risk individually if the others are not moving. And again, you need the ball to start rolling. I think ensuring demand, it's a good measure to have the ball rolling, because then it gives certainty to the suppliers. And maybe what needs to be underlined, and we start hearing that in the debates, let the market work. Markets, competition, and supply of this is, I mean, we've been working on that for 30 years, liberalizing the markets. Let's give the markets an opportunity to support those that play better, that have the best technical solutions, that are better to take those technical solutions to the market, to passengers. I mean, let's not fight the market, but let's try work with the market to accelerate reform.
Yeah.
No, I think we have to remember aviation is a sector that has always prided itself on being market-driven and self-financing and not running to the state for state support like other modes of transport sometimes do. So, and the same will happen here. I'm convinced of that. Because the demand is there, the wish from society is there to move towards this greening. We've calculated that the amounts that we will impose as minima by 2030, okay, originally we proposed 5%, it's probably going to be 6%, but with 5% we are looking at a cost increase of 2 or 3%. And when you see that ticket prices have gone up about 20% over the last few years, it puts things a bit in perspective. And we believe it's something that the sector and the passenger at the end of the day will be able and ready to finance. What we really miss today is the volumes of production, and that's why anything we can do to get this industry going, to convince the energy sector that this, even though this is a small part of their operation, they need to make these investments. I think that's our challenge in the next couple of years. Even in the US, which now is sometimes perceived as being, a flush with SAF, they're still below 0.1% of the aviation fuel. So they're basically the same level as we are. The real challenge is to get that investment going.
If I may, I fully agree with you, Philip. The frustrating thing is that the technologies are there to actually address the issue, right? We know how to do it, and indeed it's a matter of scaling up. The problem is that the green premium that is currently still coming with SAF is too high a hurdle for both the airlines and for the customers. And unless you scale this up to something significant, and I'm talking specifically now for bio, because the power to liquids is going to take much longer because you have to build the power infrastructure. But you need to scale that up. You can only scale it up if you have offtake. You only will have offtake if it is mildly competitive with fossil. And if it's not mildly competitive with fossil, you will not get the offtake. Yes, it's no problem to take a little bit, like 0.5% into your mix. Doesn't move the needle. But when you want to have 30%, then of course it's impossible. You cannot afford to pay 3-4 times what it is. So it's a chicken and egg, and this is where the whole incentive scheme comes in. I'm not saying that I'm in favor of state aid and help and God knows what. On the contrary. But if you want to drive this, you will have to do something to enable the industry to scale up to the point where the cost curve starts coming down. And otherwise, you will just keep on turning in this vicious circle that goes nowhere.
Well, I mean, I have to disagree a little bit. At least as far as our Refuel EU regulation will go, we will mandate a blending of 5-6% by 2030, going very quickly higher after that, 20% by 35 and onwards. This will be an obligation on the energy, on those who provide the fuel. So it's going to happen, otherwise there are going to be huge fines to be paid. It's a captive demand we are creating. A certain offtake that we are offering you that has been missing for the last 10-15 years. As you say, the technologies are very old, and the industry has been speaking about SAF for very many years. Nothing has happened. So we are convinced, and we had very broad support for this until the IRA came and suddenly we had to come up with money, that this is the way to go, to create a beginning of scale in the industry with a guaranteed offtake that we are creating for you. If the industry will buy more, so much the better. I mean, if we can be at 10%, in a way, we are in a luxury discussion about who's going to be the first to reach 10%, the Americans or us. It's fantastic that we have this environment where people are competing for the highest possible SAF shares, and we will have that incentive in the form of ETS exemption and free SAF allowances also above the 6%. So that will be available for everybody, and it's going to be designed in a way, it's already designed in a way that the most advanced fuels like the e-fuels will receive the highest subsidy level and may actually be coming very close to the price of fossil jet fuel.
But sorry, e-fuels, if you, for every million tons of SAF, you need about 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer. That means you need about 7, 8 gigawatts of green power. So if you want to have a meaningful amount of e-fuel, you're talking about 50, 60 gigawatts of, and it's still not a lot, right? It's only 10 million tons of electrolyzer and close to 100 gigawatts of green power. Currently, the world has only 500 megawatts of electrolyzer installed. And if you look at green power, we don't even put that much green power every year new into the European Union.
So long as the doors are all open.
It's not going to be,
exactly.
for the next 10, 15 years, it's not going to be that. Unless there is some incentive to do it. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
So I guess we're kind of getting into, we're talking a lot about SAF, but what other solutions are there to decarbonize? Are there other realistic, shorter-term solutions? Here we have a question, or suggestion, I should say. Why not consider buying carbon removals in the near term? It's scalable, cheaper than SAF, safe, and will allow you to grow sustainably.
I think you need all solutions to meet the challenge that we have ahead of us, and that includes. I mean, SAF is the main lever because it can reduce the emissions by up to 80%. But we need offsets. We need all solutions. The airspace solutions. There's no one silver bullet that will solve all of this, and that's why we're also advocating to say we also see the need for feedstock flexibility, obviously sustainable feedstock flexibility, but making sure that any solution that can help deliver a material improvement towards the goal that we collectively have can be utilized. So I think it's really important that we look at this holistically and we don't just limit ourselves in one area.
I would definitely agree. I mean, all levers are needed, but still SAF is by far the single biggest lever. And without SAF, basically the decarbonization of aviation does not happen. So very simple. So it all boils down to the production of SAF, and I think that Roland raised a very important point, that is the point of green power. Sometimes I feel that Europe has not really done the math, and subsidizing the investments to green power is one thing, but I also wonder whether there is political consensus of what that power source actually should be. Nuclear clearly is one of the big questions on that area.
I'd like maybe to come back to an issue that was raised in the debate before. For me, the key word is efficiency. I mean, this is a win-win situation. If the industry, which is a leading industry, improves efficiency and is allowed and is encouraged and is incentivized to increase efficiency, then it's a win-win. The environment wins, the industry wins, passengers win, and I think that, of course, SAF is important, but in parallel, there are efficiency measures that could be implemented, and we've heard a number of them. And I would like to underline, reductions in emissions, more efficient engines. Maybe we don't debate that much because it's happening, but I would like to underline it. This is the kind of measure that it's a win-win, and the industry is good at it. It's happening. Of course, ATM. Single European sky, that's, we've heard a lot just a few minutes ago, but I would like to underline, again, it's a win-win situation. It's good for the industry, it's good for the passengers. I think that we have to underline these efficiency measures. There is more political now power to do that, new incentives, and I think we have to come back to some of the old debates with this new perspective, and yeah, hope that at a certain stage these new incentives will make the political and regulatory debate, for instance, on the single European sky advance.
So speaking of airspace, maybe moving towards a slightly different discussion, I think Finnair might have a lot to say about this. But there is, Europe has less available airspace than it used to because of the conflict in Ukraine. And obviously, it has impacted aviation massively, on top of the pandemic, on top of other challenges. What can regulators do to help an airline like Finnair in managing that? And will it have spillover effects, not just for your business, but for decarbonization, for example?
Yeah. I mean, if we look at airspace globally, I mean, Russian airspace is a huge chunk of space that is basically closed for everybody, except the Chinese and a couple of others currently. And then, we have, pieces of the puzzle here and there. Look at Syria, or look at Iraqi or Iranian airspace, or North Korea, or many other places, especially in the eastern side of the globe, that are basically closed for airlines. So this is clearly becoming an issue. And of course, we will need to separate, the war from the other things. And when it comes to, Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think that first and foremost, the Western world should be supporting Ukraine to achieve and win a genuine and lasting peace. And once that peace has been won, then I think that the airspace closure as a sanction should be the first one to be removed. Because clearly it's problematic. I mean, it's generating far more carbon emissions on global level than actually need to be generated. It's inconvenient for passengers, costly, uneven playing field between the European and Chinese carriers. So clearly, even though peace currently might seem like a remote possibility in Ukraine, then I think that the past 3 years have shown that quick changes can happen. So therefore, it would be good for Europe also to start to get ready for the eventuality that there will be peace and subsequent airspace opening. And then the other thing is that when we consider the other cases, the sort of politicization of airspace is something that we need to get rid of. We have been seeing incidents like Belarus incident previously, a couple of years back, single European skies, and the sort of opposition for that is also a form of politicization of airspace. So we are seemingly not getting our hands around this particular topic, and it is costing us CO2 emissions today.
So we have a question for Philip on here, and touching on single European skies. What are the big hurdles there, and what needs to be done to move that forward?
Sorry. No, first of all, I think we have to have a lot of sympathy and admiration for Topi and Finnair, who've been twice hit, first by COVID and the closure of Asian traffic, and now by the impacts of the Russian invasion. And it's great to hear him say that we have to put support to Ukraine first, and make sure that there's a just outcome to this conflict. So we are indeed constrained, and about 20% of our normal airspace, not to mention the external airspace over Russia, but about 20% is not available. But we have to accept this. This is a price to pay for our support to Ukraine. Luckily, it has not affected so far consumer confidence in Europe. I think there was a big fear that this would happen. It hasn't happened. So there we have to really hold the line and continue the joint work and try to manage the situation with the help of the Eurocontrol network manager, who is doing a great job, did during COVID. The years before that were very tough. If you remember, to 18, 19, we had a lot of problems of delays. And now they will also need to help us to manage the rerouting of traffic to the best of our ability. That's why for us, the network manager is very important. Player in Europe, and it's beyond my understanding why the member states, or at least part of the member states, don't support this role of the network manager when we're talking about the single European sky again. So it's a big frustration for us that this file is not moving forward. We are definitely pushing as much as we can, but we need also everybody who is interested in progress there to knock on the doors of national governments, because that's where the problem is, and convince them of the benefits of the single sky in terms of service to the citizens, in terms of the functioning of the internal market, and in terms of the CO2 gains that can be had. So we're really on the same line as the CEOs here, trying to push this forward. But you need to knock on the doors of national governments. That is really the task. Not so much in Helsinki, because Finland's very supportive, but in some other capitals, ironically, mostly in those countries here in the center of Europe, who are suffering the most from congestion, who have the biggest airlines, who need to use that space. They are also the ones who are most opposed to modernization of ATM. So it's something that we fail to understand. And as it was mentioned before, we are not endowed with dictatorial powers, luckily, and therefore we have to convince the member states and the European Parliament to move forward, and so far this has been very, very difficult.
Maybe if I might step in, I mean, of course, what has to change? I mean, sustainability is one point, but the other one is always, I mean, follow the money. All these shocks are creating a lot of uncertainty for air navigation service providers. There is a new risk. How do you distribute the risk? How do you distribute the cost of the previous shocks? Pandemic, Ukraine. I mean, we are in a moment of change. I mean, and so the financing of the ATM services might be an opportunity also to redefine the equilibrium, the status quo that we had over the last years. So follow the money, how these shocks are impacting the financing of the whole value chain.
And who can kind of take the lead on rejigging that, or kind of adjusting this the way that's functioning?
Well, I think that we all share at this stage that the ball is on member states, I would say. That's where it needs to change. And in their relationship with the air navigation service providers, and the warranties they have on the financing of the provision of the service when there is a shock. We have to provide them certainty that they keep them in services and continuation of services. But at the same time, there are opportunities. If you want this security, this financial security, you might engage in some kind of trade-offs. I don't know if I have been clear enough.
Yeah, I think that the ball is very much in the corner of member states, and definitely the air navigation service providers and their unions. So I think that this is the triangle that probably needs to act on this.
And at this rate, I mean, this conversation has been happening for years and nothing has moved. So going back, I guess, to that question, is there any particular factor, any major turning point that can be reached that maybe, again, we're not really thinking about, or some action that someone needs to take to convince a particular member state? Other than just conversation or...
Yeah, I think that, this is about politics. And, politics is always about individual human beings as well. So to me, it starts from the customers. So once the customers see the benefit for themselves, then the politics will turn. And that is at least something that we need to think about, and probably be better at, telling the story and, making the opportunity concrete for everybody.
Do Europeans know what the single European sky is? Do they have a sense of that? Or do they know what sustainable aviation fuel is?
I think they know it when they are delayed and flights are cancelled.
Yes. They know the consequences.
They don't always know the root cause. And this is part of the difficulty for us to communicate also at the political level, that action needs to be taken at that level. It's the same with emissions. To get the argument across that there's up to 10% of emission reduction to be harvested from efficient flying, it's very hard to get this across when you're talking about ATM, or to also let's say, incentivize the air navigation service providers to try to help us to achieve those 10%, because they don't have any direct benefit. It goes a bit back to follow the money. They don't get more revenue if they save 10%. The 10% is then the gain for the airlines who save the fuel. So we have here a collective action problem as well as an explanation problem to get this message across. And if anybody has good ideas to say more or do more things, then please come forward. Sometimes the persons who ask a question actually have the answer. And they want to share it.
It's really something. It's true that when you're talking about ATM, we had an event just a few days ago in Florence, and the reaction, and I have to share, even in this room, it's, oh, that's very technical. So, and it's very technical, but behind the technicalities, there are economic incentives, there are very clear effects, and I think we have to close the loop. We have to close the loop with the general public, with everyone that, yeah, it's very technical, but at the end of the day, it's just a service that has to be delivered, there are incentives, and I think that we have to close that loop with the general public so that everyone understands why this is a relevant debate and not just technicalities.
And probably we need to ask ChatGPT of solve this. So.
I mean, I think we can talk about ChatGPT. Are airlines looking into ChatGPT as a potential tool? Is that something that could change the landscape, going in a completely different direction? But we're talking about the future here, so.
We are looking at that, definitely. So, I mean, on a number of fronts. I mean, of course, the obvious fronts, like customer service and, how that could be automized with, wiser chatbots and so forth. But then there's a completely different use case, I guess, in terms of ChatGPT in terms of coding for digital services, how to make the coders more productive, and all sorts of things like that. And then also in terms of strategy, I mean, be that single European skies or be that whatever, I think that, the boardrooms and the management meeting rooms could greatly benefit of using ChatGPT as a form of data-driven decision-making. And then this is, for example, something that our airline is currently piloting on. So I think that there are a number of use cases, and a lot of things are happening in this space, and it goes far, far beyond the normal digitalization. Now we are in the automation world in many ways, and the bottom line is that artificial intelligence is now becoming tangible, and something that actually can be used to create sort of very concrete, immediate term business benefits.
Does that mean Finnair will have fewer employees soon?
No, it could mean. I mean, let's take, for example, the way we are offering, customer service in contact centers. So clearly, I mean, I think that the sort of trend in airlines has been that airlines have been, putting contact centers to lower cost countries, be that in Asia or India or whatever. And actually now the tide might be turned. So we need much fewer people, but we need smarter, well-educated people who actually can, work with ChatGPT in order to create that sort of automated chat service for our customers. So significant consequences could be happening on a relatively short run on that space, for example.
Can I add one point on
Yeah.
digital innovation? So not on this tool specifically, but I do think that digital innovation has a role to play here in terms of scaling up. And one of the things that we've developed in Shell is Avelia, which is a blockchain book and claim platform that we developed with Energy Web Foundation, with Accenture, and with American Express Global Business Travel. And it's the idea that you can have a traceable, credible supply chain. You can, save time by, instead of building up, which will take time, a global network at every single airport. You can leverage SAF where it is available. And what we see is a concentrated buying power in corporations. So, science-based targets, those companies that have committed to that, for example, or companies that want to take a more leading role in decarbonization can actually buy SAF from an airline and an energy provider through this tool. So that's something we launched last year in June, and it's out of the pilot phase. It's a solution that we have, and we hope to continue to offer it. But I think there's a lot more room for innovations like that to bring forward, not only lowering the cost, but also raising the education and ease of buying so that this becomes more accessible.
That's very interesting.
Okay, just very, very quickly on ChatGPT, I'm not convinced it reaches the safety requirements of aviation. But of course, automation is extremely important in aviation, and I think also in ATM. At the end of the day, ATM is a big data AI problem, and I'm sure it will play a much bigger role in the future and in a very safe way. Just final point to go back on the SAF. My feeling is that the industry has an interest to favor today in-sector emission reductions, and we will be looking at book and claim. Actually, we will launch a study by next summer. We will try to get a good picture of what it means, what it can mean for aviation. But at the end of the day, the SAF has to get into the tank of the plane that people are flying. I think that's what the citizen wants at the end of the day. And it's in the interest of the sector to do this, because aviation has been paying for carbon removals and reductions for many years under the ETS, has never given credit for it. So I really think that this is the way to go, and we have to do every sector if we want to get to net zero by 2050 anyway.
If I may, new angle, what would be my question to an artificial intelligence? What is the most efficient multimodal way to travel to my next destination? Multimodality, in my view, is not about prohibitions, it's about efficiency, it's about using technology to find the most efficient, greenest way to find the way. And I think there is a lot of room for improvement there. It's not about prohibition, it's not about limitations, it's about empowering passengers to identify the most efficient, safe, fastest, least, more green solutions. And I think that would be my question for the chat.
And I think that you are spot on, because the question is very, very smart. Because, I mean, if we compare ChatGPT, for example, to Google search, I mean, that might completely change the way consumers search for solutions. And when you put that question, and when consumers start to ask those questions from a new search engine, be that ChatGPT or whatever, then you come to this that, the transport solutions and the service solutions that you offer to customers are completely different. And that is why multimodal solutions will be very important for this industry going forward. And I'm sure that we will be seeing some sort of consumer behavior change in this space going forward.
Well, couldn't ChatGPT help consumers write compensation claims to airlines to get them in trouble?
It will, and disruption management is, I mentioned these pilots that we are using related to ChatGPT. We are not on the flying operations space, because the safety standards are quite different there to Philip's point. But for example, disruption management is a clear case in point to be used in these kinds of things. So how are those disruptions handled? How are customers rerouted? How are the compensations handled? How automized that is? So there's a service case that can be built around this.
Joanna, it's already happening. Not only the passengers are using these tools, but airlines are using the tools to respond to claims. It's already happening.
It is. So this is not future, this is present.
This is present, yeah.
So.
Next year, they will be on the sponsor.
Well, I think we have to start wrapping up, because I saw earlier we were getting red flashing lights. But any final thoughts, any last thoughts, especially since this is the last panel of the day. So anything you want to leave our audience with?
Maybe one thing, because I realize that I've been hammering quite a bit on what is not happening. The good news is that I'm absolutely convinced that we will solve the SAF conundrum, and that we will be able to, as an industry, produce enough to greenify the aviation sector. It's just not sure that it will happen here in Europe. It's most likely it will happen elsewhere, where it's cheaper to produce, and Europe will be an importer, which is fine if you want to live with the geopolitical consequences. But that it will be solved, I'm absolutely convinced.
I am optimistic. Yeah, we're certainly going to try, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to try and accelerate progress, but we need to collaborate. We need to work together very effectively across demand, across supply, from a regulatory perspective. This won't happen automatically.
I like the reference to honesty that we hear in the other panel. I think these debates lack sometimes a little bit of, not these debates, but the overall debate lacks a little bit of factual ground in terms of what is achievable, what is not. I think we need more honesty in the debate. And if we have more honesty and more factual debate, I think then that the industry can be more constructive and positive and not so defensive as it gets sometimes when the debate starts getting not very honest and factual.
Short term, our focus is going to be on the summer that is coming, and hopefully we'll be able to bang all the heads together to make sure that it's smooth this summer, that there's a lot of people who can travel, that airlines and everybody else in the ecosystem is making some money again. That's a big focus, and we see a better attitude than last year in that sense, when there was a lot of blaming going on. I think there's a lot of realization today that it is an ecosystem. Everybody depends on each other, and we need to work together to make it work. Long term, of course, the only topic is greening, and on top of that list is SAF. Second on the list is ATM. On top of the list is SAF, and I'm, of course, more optimistic. I think we will have in Europe a very big SAF production. We expect, at least in our impact assessment, we expect that there's going to be huge jobs and energy security benefit to be had, 100,000 extra jobs by 2040 and 200,000 by 2050 in production, not aviation. We think this will happen despite some short-term discussions on who has the best measures. This is a longer-term issue, and I'm quite optimistic that this will help aviation, help our energy security, and create jobs. It's a huge opportunity. But we need the energy sector to collaborate, including on the question of green electricity, which is a huge issue, because everybody wants the same green electricity. I agree with you there, Roland.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for your wise thoughts and insights, and hopefully everyone took something away to think about for the future of the industry today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.